Hello everyone and welcome to my UDK tutorials series. For some reason my recorder, whenever I start it up, it just jumps to like random spots in the level, so sorry about that. But anyway, in this in this episode I'm going to be going over lighting. So basically the way I'm going to be doing this is I'm going to talk about the 4 different kinds of lights that we have in UDK, and then I'm going to kind of go into the different settings of the lights, changing the colors and adding light shafts and things like that. In the after we've gone over all the different kinds of lights, because all the different kinds of lights in UDK have a similar GUI menu, and it's really easy to understand once you have mastered how to use the lights effectively, because they all cast light in different ways. So let's go ahead and get started here. Of course, the first light I'm going to be talking about is the point light, because it is one of the more common lights that is used. The point light is the one that's in the context menu here and also here. Now there are 2 other lights in the context menu, the dominant directional light and dominant directional light movable. Those are of course the other more common lights, and I'll get to those momentarily. But the point light, once we drag that out, I have one set up right over here, and you can see that once I click on this, okay, you can see that pretty much this is just the kind of light that is like spherical, cast in circle, which means spherical, obviously. Is like this spherical light that you would imagine that would just act like a lamp of some kind, sitting on a table, casting a certain radius that you define, and it won't go behind objects. And I know this seems obvious, but like it doesn't basically cast through things, so that in this case, even though the radius is past this box, the light is not going to go like through this box and go to the edge of the radius until it stops. It is defined by objects that are in its path, even though the radius extends farther. So in this case, you can kind of see I have this like green sort of light that's like casting on the back of this, and I have the brightness set up really high, and it's casting around on this as well. If we go and look in the game and go look at this over here, hopefully it's going to render correctly. Probably not. Nope. I have to rebuild the lighting, which I did not do before I started this, because that was stupid. What I do want to show with this point light here is there is no origin to this light. That is one thing that you need to make sure that you provide whenever you are using point lights. A typical lamp, light bulb, whatever, has an origin point, the actual bulb itself, and you can see, okay, the light is coming from that bulb, hanging from the ceiling, or this lamp sitting on my desk. You can see where the light is coming from. But in the case of a point light, the light is just there, and it's not appearing to come from anything, which is what I want to show once I get in game here. You can see it's better to kind of look at it in game, because right here you see, well, it's coming from this this light bulb thing here, but in game you don't really see that. So I just want to illustrate this, and usually what people do is just stick this bulb thing inside like a mesh, and then the light will cast outside of that. So you kind of have like this little inner radius thing, like this inner circle. I can't zoom in because it's building the lighting. But you have like this inner circle here, and as long as that is outside, like whatever you want, like if you're sticking this inside a lamp, normally the lamp is not going to be incredibly huge, and this light will fit, in the lamp, and it'll be that, like, this inner circle is going to be somewhat outside, like this yellow thing is going to be somewhat outside the mesh. So as long as that's outside the mesh, it'll cast normally. If that is fully inside the mesh, then it's going to be casting basically on the inside of the mesh, and no light will escape out. So basically, if I stick this all the way inside this thing here, it's not going to cast any light out, because obviously it's inside this box. So you kind of have to make sure that inner part is outside there, and then you'll be good. But if we jump in the level here, and I freaking messed it up, dadgummit. Yes, I did, because I moved the light. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, we'll just transfer it here. All right. Now, there. Okay, so you can see there is an actual. I should have done this before. I don't know why I didn't. You can see there's no real origin. There's like a lot of blooming effect going on, but which is this kind of like extra light here, and that's just because I have the brightness set up really high to compensate for the fact that we have a whole bunch of extra light coming from the moon up there. But you can see there's no real origin, and you can't see anything off in the distance here. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind with these lights, is that there is in fact no origin. So anyway, the point light's pretty simple. It makes sense. It starts brighter at the beginning, and it kind of like slowly fades out. So it's like 0.0000001 brightness at the very, very edge here, and then it's 0 brightness at the end of the edge here. Okay, and in this case, of course, if this was completely dark, and I would just go and disable the other light, but that causes complications due to the fact that this material emits light itself, and so I wouldn't get complete darkness. But you would see like a better effect of the fact that there is a specific radius that this goes out to. You can't in the presence of other lights, of course. You don't really see so much of, it goes to the very edge and then kind of stops, but you can kind of see somewhat of an area where the origin is at. So that is the point light, and next is going to be the spotlight, which to access most of these lights you actually have to go into the actor classes, and you can see we have the 4 different lights here that we can discuss, because again the context menu doesn't show all of them, it only shows 3. But the spotlight, and I know that there are different kinds of point lights. I'll talk about that in a minute. But if we drag out a spotlight here, this is essentially the same thing as a point light, except it only casts in a certain direction. Okay, so you can see there is still this outer radius, but there's also this big circle here, which is showing like the direction. It's the cone of light that's casting. So this would be more useful for something like maybe a car's headlights, a flashlight, or if you wanted to have like one of them like cone-shaped lights that hang like in warehouses or something, and it like swings ominously when you enter. You could actually do that so that the light would be swinging back and forth like this, you see. So it would be casting light in a certain direction, because if you had a point light for this, you could rotate it all you want to, but it's not going to make a difference because of the fact that it's just in a circle. So if you rotate a point light, it's not really changing anything because it's a circle. You don't really rotate a circle. In this case, it's a certain direction. So you can see how this would be much more useful in some cases. Other than that, there's really not much to show about the spotlight. It's just kind of goes in a certain direction, and that's that. Now, if we bring up the directional light, and I know I'm kind of skipping some. I'm doing them in a specific order here. The directional light, okay, is the thing that we have here. this is the directional light. And you notice once I've selected this, there is no like sphere, there's no cone, there's nothing actually telling us what the radius of this is. And that's because there is no radius. It's infinite on the plane that it is rotated onto. And if you're not like a geometry person, basically in the direction that you face it is the direction that the light is going. Okay. To put it in math terms, well, I already did because it said the plane that it's on. But to show you basically what I mean is, and this is the only reason that this is actually going to happen is the way that the sky material is set up. It's set up to receive a light and, you know, it be able to cast up like a sky, like a moon up in the sky, and it's a very special sort of material. So normally the dominant directional lights don't do this by default. Okay, I'm just stressing that. But basically, you can have like this moon move around, and that's what I'm saying. There isn't actually normally a moon moving around, but it's set up to kind of like follow the light. So this can kind of give you a good visual representation of how this light works, because it's going to be casting in a straight line on, you know, the plane that this is rotated onto. So if I put it underneath this thing, it's actually, if you look very carefully, whoops, you can kind of see some like light rays right up in there as I move this. You kind of see some like light rays moving around, and that's actually from underneath the level. I can move, whoops, stupid rotation tool. So I can kind of move this around the level, and it'll cast shadows in different directions. So if you watch this box's shadows, the shadows are going to move around accordingly and stuff like that. And I don't have to, you know, move that on that plane. I could move it on this plane if I wanted to. And all that good stuff. So that's kind of how the dominant directional light works. It's meant to be like a sun or moon in this case. It's just kind of casts light in an infinite direction. It hits objects, doesn't go through them. You know, so you could have a house. You'd have to have light on the inside of the house, and it just kind of goes on infinitely. So that's pretty self-explanatory on how that works. And again, the moon up here is with the specific material. If I delete this this whole sky dome thing here, the moon will disappear as well. So I can have a dominant directional light, and that doesn't put the moon in here by default. I just want to make sure that that's clear with everybody, that the moon is part of this specific sky dome. And I'm not even going to do it to go into explaining how that works. I don't understand it. There's like a bajillion materials that go into doing it, and it's very complicated and confusing, and I leave that to the people who made UDK. So, anyway, the next light is probably the more complicated one, and it's kind of taken me a little bit to kind of like figure out how to use it when I've been working with lighting. I did delete that on purpose as well. So, actually, let me undo that and then copy it so I can get it back. Okay. Now, if I go in here and grab a skylight, this is somewhat complicated. It is like the dominant directional light in that it casts in an infinite. It has infinite range on a plane, but in this case, it's not in one direction, but kind of every direction. If you notice, we have no shadows. We have no shadows on these boxes at all, okay? And the color of this light is white. So it's just a nice white light casting all over this entire thing. And there's no shadows because it's casting in every direction. So this is kind of a light that you would use if you wanted to just kind of fill up everything and not have shadows in something. But it's also very good for filling up shadows because it has a very low priority. I'm going to kind of talk about priorities in a minute. Now, if I put this dominant light back in here, notice we have shadows again, okay? So that's still there. I'm going to rotate this a little bit so it's not completely 90-degree shadows. Now if I go and select this light, this skylight again, we still have shadows. Now we didn't have shadows before, and then we add the dominant light in and we have shadows now. But that kind of seems strange. Okay, why would adding another light actually cause shadows to be there when there wasn't before? But the skylight is basically there to kind of soften up the shadows when there are other lights present. Okay, so if I delete this right now, the shadows are darker. And I'm going to try to get rid of these line rendering things. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we have the shadows here. If I add this skylight back in, they get softer and the ground gets brighter. So it's basically adding the light of the skylight to everything that's already there. It's basically just brightening up everything that's already there. So it's a good way to get softer shadows if you need softer shadows to kind of fill in some areas. And you can actually combine different colors if you kind of wanted to colorize some of those shadows. So if I change this to some green color so you can kind of really see the effect of this, the shadows are really more of a really green color, and the whole ground here, especially around on the sides, has a green tinge to it. Okay, you still have your white light from up here, but you have a more green tinge on everything now, especially the shadows, because the shadows aren't receiving the white light, so the green light comes out in it. So you could kind of get some interesting effects with the skylight, being able to kind of fill in some of those shadows, add a little color to them if you wanted to. Especially for a night scene in this case, adding a little bit of a darker blue to the shadows would be kind of a good idea to kind of add a more night scene to it. So you can see they're not black, but they're more of a dark blue. It kind of brings out more of the night in the shadows. So there's kind of some little advice there. And skylights, that's why I kind of wanted to do them last. You can kind of see how the other lights worked, because the skylights are kind of hard to get used to, but they're very, very valuable tools. When you're wanting to, get specific effects, like kind of maybe colorize these shadows. Because here's the after, here's the before. It's kind of like boring shadows, but you add in that skylight, blue, and you can get some really. Actually, I could blacken that. Well, no, that doesn't do anything. If I may get just a slight blue tinge, maybe a little bit more, increase this brightness to about 3. So now you've got a nice blue tinge, maybe a bit too bright, but I'd have to sit there and play with it. You can kind of see how that can be effective. Anyway, so that is the skylight, and that's pretty much all the different kinds of lights. Now, if you were paying close attention, you did see that there are more than just 4 lights. There are all these others, like directional, you've got movable, you've got toggleable. And basically, all that means is that you can interact with them. By default, a normal point light, like this point light right here, you can't do anything with. It's just there, and it's going to be always on unless you specifically tell it to be off. But you can't interact with it in game. Like if a person is playing the game, like you would normally be playing a game. The light is either going to be on or off, but you can't change it in the level, okay? You can't move the light around. It's just there. Now, if you got a point light movable, then you could actually have a moving light, okay? If you got a toggleable, then you could have a person walk up to a switch, flip the switch, and the light goes on. Flip it again, the light goes off. You can interact with it. And the only reason that you want to use these all the time is just because it takes up a little bit more code. It's extra code that the game is having to write to be able to allow you to interact with them. So if you're not actually going to be turning them on and off, then you just want to use a normal point light, which is why that's there. And they have a slightly different animation, so you can kind of, not animation, but look to them so you can kind of tell them apart a bit. So if I go up here and go right up next to this, you can kind of see there's like a little chain thing that you could pull to kind of signify it's a toggleable point light. And this one has like a bit of a moving symbol to it, and it says DS on it. So you can see it's like a moving sort of light. And I have an upcoming tutorial that I'm going to be putting up, basically, that would going over some cinematic stuff that you could do with these lights and actually how to interact with them to make them do movements and things. But that's not in this specific tutorial. And you have those for pretty much all of these except the skylight. The skylight is just a toggleable thing because you don't need it to move around because it's infinite in every direction. Now, the dominant directional light is movable because, like I said, it's only infinite in one direction. So you could, if you wanted to take a lot of time, because it's not as simple as you think to be able to do this, but you could make a sky that has a moving sun that travels across the sky, goes down, and then actually this lighting switches to night. The moon rises, goes around the sky, switches to day again, moon rises, sun rises again, that kind of thing. It would be moving around. Like that, and so you could use a dominant directional light to be able to do that. You have a toggleable, and you just have your directional light. Now, the difference between the dominant, you see here, the dominant and the directional, is somewhat confusing. I don't fully understand the difference, okay? But basically, you're normally going to want to have your directional light dominant because, at least from what I've seen, and this is not like the professional terms, this is just kind of terms I'm using to explain this. They kind of have like a priority, the lights. As you saw with the skylight, see, it only really affected the shadows most because the directional light was kind of dominating everything else. So there's kind of like an order to it. Basically, the directional light is going to be on top of everything else. So it'll kind of like the lighting's going to render out all of the other lower priority lights, like a skylight is a lower priority. That's going to just fill in all of the dark areas. And it did kind of affect the ground here a little bit. You did see there was it was slightly brighter, but there wasn't a major color change. So, just so everybody can completely understand, stick one of these back in here. I'm going to make this some like really annoying pink color. Okay, there is a slight color change. You can see it most with the shadows, but there's not this white color here has not changed to pink. Again, there's a slight color change, but it's not major. Okay, this is still the dominant light. But basically, it's going to render all the lower priority priority lights last because it kind of fills in the shadows. Point lights and things like that I'm not really sure what the priority of them are. But if I were to just stick a point light out here, you're not really going to be able to see much in effect. Again, I'll change this to like a really annoying color, like a pink or something. And you can see it on the side of that, but you can't really see it. Oh wait, I got to get rid of that skylight. Alright, so you can see it on the side of that, but you can't really see it much on the ground. You can see it barely. And that is probably partially due to the brightness. So if I stick the brightness way up, now you can kind of see it. But it's not really going all the way to the edge here. Because, again, the dominant directional light here is dominating all the other lighting. So you don't really want to set a point light or like a spotlight to a dominant light because they're not infinite. I would have to make the radius of this point light huge if I wanted to have it be dominant, because you can only have one dominant light per level. Otherwise, there's issues. The game doesn't like it if you have multiple dominant lights per level. Basically, the lighting completely shuts down because it doesn't know which one is the sun. And, I mean, it's not like it's actually saying this is a sun, but that's the best example I can give you. if you have two dominant directional lights, it's like basically having two suns in the sky. You don't have two suns in the sky. You're only supposed to have one. So it gets confused, and it's not really sure which to render, and which to make the dominant. I know that may not make too much sense because I don't really know all the technical aspects behind it. That's just kind of what I've observed when I've been messing around with lighting, that they kind of have like these priorities. So I do apologize if that doesn't make too much sense. But onwards to the messing around with the settings and making cool changes bit. You have, of course, seen me changing the light color here. That's pretty self-explanatory. You've got a little color palette, and you can kind of change it, more this way and whatever you want. And you can, of course, manually change RGB values and all that good stuff. So that's, of course, the color palette. But we have a lot more things to mess with. So your trace distance, and again, these settings are the same for every light. Just so people know, this is the point light properties. Okay, similar settings. This is the dominant directional light settings. They are almost exactly the same. The only thing, of course, that's popping up here is the trace distance for the dominant directional light. But it's pretty much the same thing. Okay. Now, the trace distance is, of course, it basically kind of telling it what the distance is to where it shouldn't render shadows anymore. As you can see, what the tooltip is. But this is basically just supposed to be like a really huge value that's not really going to matter much at all unless you have like an incredibly huge world like Skyrim or something. In that case, you have a really big world, and you probably don't want to render all of the shadows in the entire world at one time, because then it would just be, your computer would explode. Which is kind of what this trace distance is, about basically how far away should I render shadows. And normally you want it to be really big, because you don't want to have to be rendering shadows like all of the time. You want to give the player some room to move around. And if you're like walking up the side of a mountain, and you look out really far, you don't want to like there be a point where, oh well, there's no shadows over on those far trees over there or something like that. That's essentially kind of the basics of what it is. And of course, you can read the tooltip there. Now, the dynamic shadow radius, all this stuff, is for shadow maps. So I don't really know what a shadow map is. I've tried looking some of this stuff up, by the way, that I don't know what it is, just for the record. And Google was not giving me any help at all. So I couldn't. I've was unable to kind of look up what this stuff is. So it's not completely my fault that I'm not able to tell you what these specific options do. But I mean, they have to do with shadow maps, which I've never really heard of. Not that I'm, extremely popular in the whole working on UDK projects thing, but anyway. Light mask settings. Now, light mask is something that I've got to get to, so I will skip these for now, and I will get back to light mask. The light mask is also an important thing. I hadn't actually mentioned that yet, and I apologize for that, but I will make sure I talk about that before we end off the thing, because light mask is very important in lighting. But anyway, now on to the actual light components. The brightness is, of course, self-explanatory. If I lower this, less bright. Raise this, extremely bright, and hurt your eyes. So that's self-explanatory. And again, point lights, the origin will be the displayed brightness here, and it gets lower as you go farther away from the origin. So do keep that in mind, that if you raise the brightness, you also have to take into account like the radius. Sometimes raising the radius can help more than just raising the brightness, because you don't want your origin to be so bright that people can't look at it. Like a lamp, yes, the light bulb is bright in a lamp, but it's not so bright that if you look at your lamp, your eyes will burn out of their sockets. So, and anyway, your light color, of course, and your RGB values, and your alpha channel. Now, a function. This is, of course, this is like a code-specific thing. So you can like apply a light function to this if you have light functions listed. I'm not going to get into this because I don't know any of the UDK code, because that's more of a C++, but not actually C++. It's Unreal script, which is based loosely on C++, which they're changing in the new Unreal Engine, and I don't know any C++ anyway. Anyway, whatever. Of course, this is a simple checkbox. That's self-explanatory. And I believe this is accessible through Kismet, to be able to toggle the light on and off. I'm not entirely sure on that. I believe usually it's just the color and brightness, but I'd have to double check. Of course, that's self-explanatory, casting shadows. If I decheck this, no shadows are casting, but it's still giving off the same amount of light. So you can casting static shadows, okay, and casting dynamic shadows are two separate things. Notice it went off when I did dynamic shadows and not with static shadows. And I believe that is more due to the fact that the way this whole material thing's set up. So you kind of have to keep in mind that there are two different kinds of shadows. And, well, actually, there's a third, because it's a composite shadow. But usually you're just going to be messing with static and dynamic. So you want to make sure that you're messing with the right thing. Because if I put both of these off, see, dynamic shadows, both of them off, you're not casting any shadows except the composite ones. So, anyway. Hopefully that makes sense, because I would have figured this was a static object, but apparently it is not. So, hooray for making things more confusing for me as I'm trying to explain things. Anyway, you have your composite shadows, affect composite shadow direction, and of course, composite shadows, like, I did try to look this up to get more information on exactly what a composite shadow is. But that's like essentially like your lighting environment, like you're compositing things, setting up like a composite type object. And I wasn't really able to gather a lot of information on, okay, what does that mean? But this is like not something I guess you would see normally. You'd have to do like extra work, like the shadow, like a mapping type thing. Anyway. So you have non-modulated self-shadowing. In self-shadowing, you wouldn't really use much, because obviously you don't really need to shadow the light itself too much. But you've got self-shadow only. Okay, so this says whether light should cast shadows only from a dynamic object onto itself. So, you don't really need self-shadowing very often, because you don't need a light casting back onto itself unless you have like mirrors or like water or something where it's going to be reflecting back and forth maybe. And then of course you have your different lighting channels here that you can like mess around with if you need to. That is not necessary. Your shadowing mode, so you can modulate better if you wish to. Shadow color. Now, I have played around with messing with this, but this doesn't really seem to change anything. It kind of just reverts the color back to black. So, that may just be due to the fact that it's complete alpha. So if I change this up now... Yeah, there we go. Now it's doing it. But again, it's not really changing the color of the shadows themselves. So I don't really know what that is supposed to do. Well, well, it says modulate though, so if it casts modulated shadows, so modulate, which is not letting me change either. So, and if you have your shadow filter quality, shadow resolution, max shadow resolution, and shadow fade resolution, changeable there as well. So, I'm going to skip this real quick and just go down to this one to get it out of the way. This is pretty self-explanatory. You can just tell it whether or not to use image reflection on the specular light channel. And then the brightness of that reflection. So you could actually have the brightness be the same as the actual light or lower, because normally the reflections are lower because light is still traveling. It's just traveling now in this opposite direction that it was originally traveling. Which is, when you look at water, it's not exactly the same amount of brightness. It's slightly darker. So you can kind of get that effect with the light there. Now, light shafts are cool. I like light shafts. They're fun to play with. I'm going to, real quick, because it would be so much easier to show this with, grab a tree out of here. So if I give me a speed tree real quick. There. So let's grab this, because this looks like a good one. And increase the size, like a whole bunch. And run over here. Now, where's the light at in relation to this thing? Okay, so now you can kind of, if I move back and forth, you can kind of see them like changing a little bit there, right there. So, this needs to be real time. Okay, so you can kind of see the light shaft right there, and this is why I wanted to grab a tree, so it would kind of move around on its own without me having to do stuff. So, if I make this a little bit smaller. Basically, oh wait, that is the wrong thing. I need this, thank you. Get perhaps a little closer. There. So, light shafts, of course, are these like little light shafts, obviously, that are coming through the branches and stuff, and you can disable them if you want to. Now, personally, I always think that disabling it kind of gives a less realistic lighting effect, because if I re-enable them, you see like the lighting, you see like a huge lighting change there. It just looks so much better with the light shafts, though it does, of course, require a lot more rendering, because it has to, do these dynamically. But you have your occlusion depth range, and basically everything closer to the camera than this distance will occlude light shafts for directional lights. And basically, if I increase this, well, no, that's not going to work right like I wanted to. I wasn't entirely sure what occlusion meant. I tried to look it up, but Google again wouldn't tell me anything, because it was just people talking about how to do occlusion, but they weren't giving a definition of what occlusion was. So I do apologize on the fact that I can't really showcase this right, because occlude. Well, I just looked up the word occlude, but it had to do with like blood vessels, and Wikipedia wasn't any help because I was talking about freaking blood vessels. So, like, I don't want to learn about occlusion in blood vessels. I want to learn about UDK occlusion lighting. Dadgummit. But anyway, now the bloom, if I increase this hugely, it kind of makes them like sort of brighter, but what the bloom is doing is kind of giving a bigger disc. So if I go out here, you can see like this kind of disc around the light, and most lights have a bloom effect to some degree, and it kind of gives you like an origin of the light there. If I put this to 1, notice it's much smaller now. Now it is still there, it's on the very edge, but you can kind of see the moon, quote unquote, much clearer. And of course, this does naturally affect the light shafts and how they render, because if I increase this hugely, it kind of just gives the light shafts themselves more brightness. And the bloom threshold, doesn't really take into account, because basically that just has to be larger than the scene color luminance. If it's not, it won't create light shafts, so I put this to 0. It freaking makes massive light shafts, which I did not expect in the slightest. Oh, I got it backwards. The scene color luminance must be larger. So if I make this like freaking 1,000, there's not going to be hardly any light shafts at all. So you can kind of control that. I'm not exactly sure what the scene color luminance is, but you know, you can kind of control like kind of how the light shafts look a little bit. So 7 is not going to work. 5, no. 2, no. So I guess the scene color luminance is somewhere around 1. I put this to 0, and again, you get these like, hey, we're in a freaking rock concert, and I can't see freaking crap now. You get like a really cool effect from those the stars there too, eh? So there you go. You got yourself like a freaking giant spotlight there. Let me do that because it's hurting my freaking face. Alright, now you have the screen blend, something about scene color luminance, and it's telling you about something about Photoshop screen blend mode, which I don't know anything about because I don't ever use Photoshop for hardly anything. I don't use it much. I'm not more of the artsy person. I would know more about this whole like blending thingy with like materials and how all this works if I were more of an artsy person, but I'm not. Then naturally you can affect the bloom tint. If I change this to like a green color, that's kind of what that does. So you want this to kind of match the lighting, sort of, but you could kind of combine this with your skylight if you wanted, like how I had the green shadows earlier. You could set up the same green color as your bloom effect, and then it would kind of look as if the light's casting multiple kinds of lights, and you shouldn't have just randomly done that, but whatever you did. So you could kind of like have two sort of like light colors. The light that is actually casting all on the ground and the actual bloom effect. So if you take a skylight, you could color the shadows and you could have, you know, that. It would be interesting looking. So there's that. And you adjust the RGB values and the radial blur percent. Basically, you know, obviously that. So if I do 0, you still get like light like you're getting like some blooming effects, and you're getting like a couple light shafty things, very very little. And it's 15 is the lowest for some reason, but because that has to have something. But if I put this, you know, back up to 100, maybe 50. Kind of like lowers how far, you know, they go, because there's some light shafts right there, but they're not going very far. Will it go past 100? No. Okay. So you can kind of see it kind of goes farther like that. So you can kind of adjust that as well as the bloom threshold. So if I set this to 0 again and I set this to like 50, they kind of help to give that. So you can have a giant supernova exploding in your face. Sort of. It's kind of what that looks like, maybe. Sort of. So that looks cool, I must say. So, you know, you can kind of combine those together and get something like that. An occlusion mask darkness. Occlusion, again, not knowing the value for occlusion is. So it does stuff. I'm sorry, I don't know what that means, but I tried to look it up, so props for that at least. But anyway, that's kind of the light shafts and how they work. Now, the only other thing I need to talk about is light mass. Light mass is very important. This right here is a light mass importance volume. You want to have this in every single level, every one, because it speeds up your lighting tremendously. Basically, it kind of tells the game, or well, it tells UDK where your lighting is going to be occurring at, so that it can kind of know where to do its light mass. And that kind of sounds stupid because you're like, well, I'm going to be doing my lighting like where stuff is, obviously. But you have to consider the fact that, hey, this is infinite. Okay, it's infinite in every direction. So basically, let's just pretend you have a game where you have a bunch of sky islands. And you can like teleport to each sky island. And you can see the sky islands maybe off in the distance from each other. But what you would want to do is put these light mass importance volumes over and make sure like you cover every sky island in like this big, cube of light mass importance volume. You don't cover the entire level, but you cover each little cube. That way the lighting knows, okay, render here, and render here. You don't have to render the lighting between the spots where the islands are. You don't have to render lighting there because there's nothing, because the game, like normally, if you just put a light mass volume over the entire thing, it would render lighting, even though there's nothing to actually cast a light onto. So you do need to keep that in mind. And that's kind of what this is for. It's kind of like show the level kind of, hey, render light in this area alone. And it's not like all-inclusive where, okay, if you walk outside this, it'll like not have any light. It'll kind of still render light there. But it also gives a nice light mass effect to stuff. Now, if I open this back up and I go back to the light mass, okay, and you go to light mass settings, you can kind of see some stuff about indirect lighting, and that's kind of what light mass does. It's a very, very nifty feature. If you're in a room, okay, and the light mass is designed to emulate real life light. If you're in a room and you have like a lamp, the lamp is maybe emitting yellow light. Well, say you have some different colors along your wall. As the light travels throughout your room and the light hits the different colors on your wall, it'll kind of like blend all the colors together and kind of like bounce colors around your room. And the light itself, the light color, will also blend in with the room. And that's kind of how light works. It bounces around, and it's not going to just hit something and then stop. It's going to actually bounce. So one thing that you'll notice whenever you start putting these light mass importance volumes in your level is that you will get slightly more light than you thought you might, because the light is going to bounce around. It kind of get into those corners and make them not so dark, because it's going to kind of bounce around your room. And you kind of notice this, if you actually are in a room, because I have a lamp, sitting beside my computer monitor right now. It's kind of in the where it's situated, it's casting room light towards me, but off towards the back of it, there's like some obstructions, so that it can't cast light all over my room. Yet the corners of my room aren't completely shrouded in darkness. I can see it to them, though they aren't as bright as before, and even though there isn't a direct path to them, there is still light there because light is bounced around my room off of various objects, and that's what the light mass does. And the light mass importance volume, it really helps speed up the lighting and various things like that. I did render the lighting earlier. I tried to anyway. Maybe that was in this record. I can't remember. I've tried recording this a couple times because I messed a couple things up. But I can just go ahead and maybe render the lighting right now. Well, no, crap. That's not what I meant to do. So if I try rendering the lighting now, it's going to start going off here and start building, and it might take it'll take a couple seconds to render. But having this on here helps it run so much faster. And I'll kind of show you, it render now, and then I'll take it off, and it may or may not show a difference, but it definitely helps whenever you have like times where your lighting is running like several hours to process. And even now, it's taking, quite a while to render out, because we have it, of course, set to production. But that's kind of all I have to say about the light mask, and I'll go back and show you some of the more settings and kind of what they do. But it's all about like indirect lighting. So because if you do notice, these shadows that we have are not like completely stark dark, because the whole reason shadows occur is that there isn't light immediately casting in that area. Like it hits something and it doesn't travel all the way through. Yet these shadows aren't like pitch black dark. And that's because of the indirect lighting. It's kind of filled out more. And I did this on production, and it kind of rendered out a little bit better, this tree here specifically. Now if I take this off, I'm going to just delete this entire thing and re-render the lighting. It's probably going to take a lot longer. So it took maybe about a minute earlier. Let's see about how long it takes now. It's probably going to. I'm probably going to stop it sometime here shortly. I'm not sure if we'll get a difference in the actual light look without the light mask. Importance volume, I'm pretty sure it still renders light mask, but it just takes a little longer without that importance volume. Anyway, then I'll go ahead and talk about the couple little settings that there are, and that'll be about it for the lighting tutorial. So hopefully you have enjoyed. I mean, I'm not quite finished yet, but this is still rendering. I do appreciate feedback. Like I'm always like recording the same thing like a whole bunch of times, which is why it does take me a while to get out videos, because I'll like record for an hour or something, say no, that wasn't right, and just delete it and start over. I can't do much editing because the render times just are astronomical, due to the fact that the videos are long and the quality of them. So I can't do much in the way of editing. I have to just kind of render it out straight as it is, and then post it to YouTube. So I do appreciate any feedback though of things that I can fix. And okay, so that obviously that the lighting took much longer. We still have about the same effect, but you can see the lighting took much longer without that importance volume. And that was just about maybe, this small level. You can imagine the difference it would make whenever you have huge levels. So they're pretty simple to place though. All you really have to do is just have the builder brush. You just go over here to volumes and light mass importance volume right there. And really all you have to do is just place it like, around your level. And you saw how they had it here. It was just a big cube around the level. You don't have to do anything major. Just make sure, of course, that you do cover everything in your level. So if you have like tall buildings or something, just stretch it way up into the sky and you'll be fine. You don't want to overdo it, because again, the light mass importance volume is telling the UDK where to render the lighting. So if you have it like, you'd say, okay, just to be safe, I'm going to stretch this like an extra 100 feet off in this direction. Well, that's an extra 100 feet that's having to be rendered that it's not. So you don't have to be like incredibly careful with it, but at the same time, you don't want to overdo being cautious. So, but on to those couple indirect lighting settings that I was going to talk about. Basically, you have the scale factor for the indirect lighting, the saturation, and the shadow exponent. So this might be kind of hard to show without having to constantly re-render the lighting, but this is going to affect how that indirect lighting looks. And this is kind of hard to do outside. But if you have like, if you're like in a room and working on a level, and you have a light off in the corner, maybe hanging from the ceiling or something, and you have several objects that are maybe obstructing a view, and you have like shadows in the corner. What this indirect lighting is going to do is affect those areas where the shadows are over in the corners, and basically allow you to scale up the indirect lighting. And if this is a really high number, it's going to be basically, there's going to be more indirect lighting. The saturation is of course, if you know what saturation means, then this makes perfect sense. Saturation is basically how much color there is, basically. No saturation means it's like black and white, and full saturation means that all the colors are there. So, that makes pretty much sense. And it's saying 0 will be completely desaturated, 1 is unchanged. So if you put this to 0, basically the indirect lighting is not going to is kind of going to desaturate some of the colors. It's going to make it more black and white, and not add colors to it. So there are times when you might want to use that, just kind of give you nice black shadows if you wanted to do that. And shadow exponent, the fall off of the shadows is kind of what that is, and you can kind of affect that to change up the starkness of your shadows, I guess. If you wanted nice dark shadows with a basically the kind of shadow that it's like, okay, here's a shadow, here's not the shadow. Like maybe like the kind of where a tree where you can like really see, okay, here's a shadow, here's not. The shadows where you wouldn't really be seeing this much was more where, okay, you're getting some direct lighting, but it's kind of like going slowly into where there's a dark area. I don't really know a good example, but this is basically your kind of like shadow fall off, and your light source angle is that. The angle that the directional light's emissive surface extends relative to receiver. So it is kind of affecting that. The techie words are confusing, but essentially this is affecting the area. It says directional light's emissive surface. So emissive surface being the glowing part of the emissive surface is usually the glowing thing of the lights is what I can see. So, oh crap, I can't think of a good way to explain what this is right off the top of my head. But anyway, I do hope that you have enjoyed the tutorials. I mean, I'm doing more, obviously, but like this tutorial specifically. And like I was saying when the lighting was rendering, feedback is, of course, appreciated. And I'm not like trying to be annoying when I say this. I just want to make sure that I'm doing things right, because if I don't know I'm doing something wrong, I can't fix it. So I have had people, say about some of my videos that, okay, I don't like this because, and they gave the video a dislike, but they at least told me why I didn't like that, and I'm fine with that as long as you tell me what you didn't like specifically about the video. Then I can at least fix it next time, and hopefully gain your approval by being able to fix the issues that are there. So thank you for watching, and if you have any ideas for future tutorials, I'm all ears. And I'll see you in another video. Thank you for watching.